On Friday, April 25th, the Karen Reed retrial saw day 4 of testimony. At the start of the day, the jury actually spent some time at 34 Fairview Rd where they were able to see the outside of the house as well as Karen Reed's SUV. After that, they came back to the courthouse to hear from 2 more Commonwealth witnesses before being excused for the weekend. And here they heard testimony about Karen's blood alcohol testing and a conversation that she had with another Canton paramedic on the morning of January 28th, 2022. Let's get into it. Okay, so first, like I've said before in the previous recaps, if you need more background on this case, linked in the description below are some playlists to the case to get you totally caught up. In the meantime, if you're enjoying the video, engaging with it by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, maybe even sharing it will help boost it with the algorithm on YouTube. Anyway, let's dive in. As I said before, the day started off with the jury viewing the house and Karen's SUV at 34 Fairview Rd. Before they did, Judge Canton gave them some instructions about the view, and the attorneys for both sides had an opportunity to stand up in front of them and to tell them what they wanted the jury to focus on. For example, the Commonwealth wanted them to pay special attention to the SUV's back bumper, especially the height of the bumper and the height of the right rear taillight. The defense, on the other hand, wanted the jury to focus on things like the distance of the house's second floor window from the street and to look at all 3 front doors and the distance of the doors to the driveway. Anyway, the cameras couldn't follow the jury to 34 Fairview Rd, but there were some journalists that were able to go and report on some of it to social media. Anyway, then they came back, and the first witness of the day was the Commonwealth's 7th witness. This was Dr. Garrey Faller. On January 29th, 2022, he was a physician pathologist working at Good Samaritan Hospital, where John O'Keefe was taken and where Karen Reed was also taken. As a pathologist, he said that he looks at tests that are drawn from the body to see if some kind of a diagnosis can be made. And this includes blood draws for testing for things like alcohol content. And on January 29th, 2022, he says that he tested the blood draw taken by a phlebotomist from Karen Reed. When testifying, Dr. Faller went over the whole process of what happens when someone's blood is drawn and the various precautions they take to ensure that the test is accurate and free from contamination. And so at 9:03 a.m., the blood draw was ordered, and at 9:08 a.m., the blood was drawn. Then at 9:53 a.m., the results of the test were uploaded into the hospital system. And those results showed her blood had 93 milligrams per deciliter of alcohol. Now, we don't know exactly what that means in terms of her blood alcohol content that we would see from a forensic test, but I'm sure we'll be finding that out later as we did in the first trial. Now, on cross-examination, the defense did a good job of distinguishing between the blood serum tests that they do in clinical labs like at Good Samaritan Hospital and the kind of tests that they do in a forensic lab to be used by law enforcement and specifically in a courtroom. For example, the clinical serum test analyzes just the serum or the plasma that gets left behind after they separate everything out in a centrifuge. Then they don't test for ethanol directly, but rather for NADH, which is a byproduct of alcohol. But on the other hand, the test that forensic labs use for results that are used in a courtroom is different. There, they test the whole blood and they measure the ethanol directly. The reason this is significant to the defense is because by testing for NADH, the serum test opens itself up to a few limitations. For example, there are some things that can interfere with a test's accurate measurement of NADH. As Dr. Faller said, these are things like hemolysis, high bilirubin counts, and high lipids in the blood. Also, he said the serum test doesn't just detect ethanol, the alcohol we find in alcoholic beverages. It apparently also will detect propanol and butanol as well. In addition to that, it can also get interference from unusual hematologic malignancies and from when a patient is anemic. And the same is true when the patient has high levels of LDH and lactic acid. So if a patient has something like liver disease, kidney disease, a muscle injury, trauma, or anemia, their LDH levels might rise, and there is a chance that the blood serum test detects some NADH that isn't there from drinking alcohol. And the same is true if the patient has multiple sclerosis. And if you remembered from day 2 or day 3, it came out that Karen has MS. And so it looks like that's why that was drawn out here. Now, in cross-examination, defense attorney Emily Little also suggested that Karen may have been severely anemic on January 29th, 2022. Now, Dr. Faller did say that even with the differences, the serum test and the whole blood test basically yield the same results. And as far as the MS is concerned, he said that even with the worst MS patients, the NADH levels, while elevated, aren't elevated enough to statistically create a false positive in a serum test. He also pointed out multiple times that technically what they were testing for wasn't the levels of NADH, but the level of the rate of change of NADH over time. And overall, I thought that he testified fairly well and he held up pretty well on cross-examination. But there is some room for the defense possibly to have created some space to question the results of these blood tests. So maybe the jury questions the validity of the test done on Karen, maybe not. Time will tell. Okay, so next was the Commonwealth's 9th witness. This was Jason Becker. He's another EMT/paramedic for the Canton Fire Department. Like Whitley before, Becker testified that he was on scene in response to a call for a Section 12. Remember that a Section 12 is basically when somebody is having some sort of a psychiatric or psychological episode that is of concern. Becker testified that she was initially agitated and that she was fluctuating between calmness and agitation marked by fast, repetitive speech. But the main point in his testimony was that he had a conversation with Karen where Karen apparently said the last conversation she had with John O'Keefe was an argument. That said, she apparently didn't say what it was about or any of the circumstances of the conversation. Now, on cross-examination, the defense did highlight that Karen's overall behavior was consistent with someone having gone through some trauma. This helps the defense, as I mentioned in a previous recap. Anyway, another thing that was highlighted was the fact that Karen was fairly consistently referring to John as her husband, not her boyfriend. Other first responder witnesses had previously testified to her referring to him as her husband, but it wasn't until today that I realized that this actually is fairly helpful to the defense potentially. On cross, it was pointed out that maybe she called him her husband so that she could go to the hospital with him and be able to be nearby to get information on what was happening to him as it was happening. But there's another thing. The Commonwealth has been making it seem like Karen and John had no future because their relationship was essentially ending and that they both knew it. But yet, here Karen's referring to him as her husband, not her boyfriend. Maybe there's not much behind it, but I think her using the word husband, I would think, is a signal that Karen thought of their relationship as enduring for a bit longer into the future. And it seems like she had some semblance of hope, perhaps, that he was going to survive. That is, to me personally, it just doesn't seem like someone who knew that the relationship was ending would refer to their partner as their spouse when they weren't even married. Anyway, the main quibble on cross-examination was over the details of Karen's "we got into an argument" statement. As it turned out, Becker had previously testified to the grand jury that Karen told him they had had an argument earlier in the night and that her last words to John were made in anger. Jackson also highlighted that during this part of the conversation, Karen had taken out her phone and shown Becker a bunch of missed calls to John. And so the suggestion here is that she was talking about perhaps voicemails that she left for John the night before. But Becker did agree that when she said earlier in the night, he really didn't know what that meant, whether 6 p.m. or closer to midnight. And so this part might end up being a little bit of a wash. Anyway, after that, the judge released the jury for the weekend. They'll return on Monday for a half day of testimony as the attorneys have some other things to work out for the coming trial days. For my part, it does seem like the Commonwealth is just sort of trucking along now, but the defense is scoring a few points here and there. And typically at this point in the trial, it's the prosecution that is going to seem like they have a stronger case. They might seem like they're really moving the ball forward more and more. It's when the trial transfers over to the defense's case in chief that things might start looking a bit different. The thing that was different in the first trial is that the Commonwealth never quite really got to that point to begin with, at least in my opinion. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Is the Commonwealth doing a better job this time around, or is the defense doing a good enough job to keep the Commonwealth back? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you would hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more coverage of crazy cases and interesting legal topics like this trial, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out there, especially the next recap for this trial. And if you are really enjoying the content and you want to know how to best support the channel, consider becoming a member of Byte Club. You can join either through YouTube memberships or by becoming a supporter on Patreon. Links to both are in the description below. Otherwise, see you in the next recap.